Welcome to Crossroads. Do states have the right to cooperate with federal authorities or not to when they decide to? Well, can the federal government cut funding to states if they refuse to do it? Well, we could soon get answers to both of these questions. President Donald Trump is now signing an executive order targeting sanctuary cities, and this comes on the heels of legal challenges that blocked his federal freeze on sanctuary cities. Now look, a lot has gone on over the last few days. We'll get into that, but first, one of the key parts of this is a new Trump order that challenges the policies of sanctuary cities. And this executive order is called Protecting American Communities from Criminal Aliens. And here's what it does according to the White House fact sheet. It says this: the order directs the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to publish a list of states and local jurisdictions obstructing federal immigration law enforcement and notify each sanctuary city jurisdiction of its noncompliance, providing an opportunity to correct it. Now, real quick here, the key word is obstructing. When they're saying obstructing, they're actually referring to a crime. And understand that in context of them recently arresting 2 judges under, again, a very similar charge, this could mean they're going to go after these local officials for quote-unquote obstruction. That could be what they're signaling here. It says this as well: sanctuary jurisdictions that do not comply with federal law may lose federal funding. And it says the order directs that Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to pursue all necessary legal remedies and enforcement measures, remember, legal remedies like criminal charges possibly, to bring non-compliant jurisdictions into compliance. And it adds, it instructs the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to develop mechanisms for proper eligibility verification in sanctuary jurisdictions to prevent illegal aliens from receiving federal public benefits. And it says the order ensures illegal aliens are not being favored over American citizens by directing the Attorney General to address state or local laws that unlawfully prioritize aliens. It adds this includes in-state tuition benefits for aliens or criminal sentencing factors that also favor aliens. A lot of stuff there, folks. Now, it seems this is going to be going after sanctuary cities through a lot of different means. One of them could be on obstruction, meaning if there are local officials directly involved in obstructing law enforcement, because it's actually what sanctuary city laws do. They prevent law enforcement from cooperating with federal authorities when it comes to, immigration issues. It could be that. It could also be, for example, a lot of the free food, free housing, social programs they give to them. Some of that also ties into how they verify whether a person is a citizen or not. And it also includes a lot of other programs, as they mention school tuition, paying for their schools. It could be, for example, any state program that may serve them in various ways using federal money. They're going to be going after all of this. Now, Trump also signed a second executive order that related to this one. It increases and empowers law enforcement officers through providing, quote, legal resources and indemnification for officers facing unjust legal expenses from official duties, including pro bono assistance, as well as increase the provision of surplus military assets to support local law enforcement and evaluate their use in crime prevention. Now, some people criticize the quote-unquote militarization of the police. The reality is the police also deal with things that might justify that, if you understand that Americans can, own effectively war weapons. Now, White House Secretary Karoline Leavitt also spoke about these orders. Here's what she had to say during a press conference yesterday. Watch.
President Trump will sign an executive order on law and order and another executive order on sanctuary cities. The first EO will strengthen and unleash America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent citizens. The second EO is centered around protecting American communities from criminal aliens, and it will direct the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to publish a list of state and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws. After these are signed, the president will have signed more than 140 executive orders already, rapidly approaching the total number signed by the Biden administration over the course of 4 years in office. Speaking of Joe Biden, it was his awful open border policies that recklessly allowed more than 10 million illegal aliens to invade the United States over the past 4 years.
Now, briefly on the executive orders, that's a lot of executive orders. Trump is only about 100 days in, just had his anniversary for that. He has had issues. He's issued really about as many orders as Biden did during his entire time in office in 100 days. And remember also, using executive orders like this, it used to be kind of controversial. In fact, Republicans used to be against it. If you remember during Obama's second term in office, Republicans had a majority in the House and Senate. Obama was criticized for using executive orders to bypass Congress. And there were a lot of questions, including from Republicans, on whether it was even legal that he was doing that. Now, Republicans, they used to be fairly critical of executive orders. Trump is kind of using those powers to a very strong degree right now. And when it comes to this, the argument from the Trump side is, if you did it, I will do it too. When it came even to some of the election law changes, he was doing that as well. He says, look, I don't support these things, but if you have done it, you say it's precedent now, I'm going to use it. Trump is kind of going all in with executive orders. Now, it seems his argument is that he's trying to jumpstart his policies. Because look, Biden coming out on top in the 2020 elections, that would mean normally Trump would have to effectively start again from scratch. And that means going, of course, through all the legal review, basically not getting anything done because of Congress, and he would effectively come back in for a second term and probably not do a whole lot. The executive orders are kind of a way of resetting things to where he would have been anyways, right, had he never left office. But that also means that he's not going to be challenged on them, I think. This does not mean that he's not going to face challenges. When it comes to sanctuary cities, this is actually one of the bigger challenges, and it goes back pretty far. Remember, sanctuary city laws were mainly put into place during Trump's first term in office. He campaigned heavily back in 2015 on building the wall. He says, we're going to build the wall, right? And also on mass deportations. If you've noticed, both of those efforts were heavily blocked. They never really got done. We never really saw mass deportations. The wall was never finished. They had the stuff there. The governments were even auctioning off the pieces for it. Now, state-level sanctuary city laws effectively were used to kind of block a lot of what Trump was trying to do on the deportation side. It was a way to prevent Trump from carrying out his agenda effectively. And this debate over federal law and state rights, well, it's kind of reaching a boiling point. During the Biden administration, this was also a big point. Remember, Texas and Florida were resisting a lot of what Biden was doing, and the argument also was state rights, although that was also deemed an extremist word. If you talked about federal overreach or state rights, you were labeled an extremist. Now it's not being framed that way anymore. Again, sanctuary cities are effectively doing that. And there's actually, especially now, the Trump administration is moving to arrest even local officials being accused of blocking deportation efforts. When it comes to sanctuary city laws, the issue has always been, can states effectively not enforce the law? Can states block the federal government from enforcing the law? To what extent is that legal? And I think we're going to get some answers on this soon. The message being sent right now is that officials, or even judges for that matter, if they try to, again, obstruct deportations, including under state law, they could themselves be arrested. But there's also a big legal conflict with sanctuary cities kind of overall right now. The Trump administration was moving to block federal funding to around 16 sanctuary cities already. This was in addition to, lawsuits over the policies. It's just one example of this. The administration filed a lawsuit just recently against Rochester County in New York. This is 13 ABC. It says the Trump administration is taking the city of Rochester to court following a controversial encounter between Rochester police officers and federal immigration authorities. It says following the March 24th traffic stop on Whitney Street near Lale Avenue, Mayor Malik Evans and Police Chief David Smith claimed the officers involved violated the city's immigration policy by assisting federal agents at the scene. Long story short, federal agents had to traffic stop several individuals refusing to cooperate, would not roll down their windows. We don't know how many there were in the car. I believe it was 5. They requested assistance from the police. The police ordered them, roll down your windows, get out of the car. They refused. They said, we're going to smash the windows if you don't. Then they cooperated. Police then left them to be arrested, and that was that. But the police were facing punishment by the city. The police were punished for that because, according to, again, the sanctuary city laws, the local officials argued police are not allowed to assist federal agents. And even when agents requested help or assistance, they were not allowed to do it. And so, again, they're facing punishment. Now, it says this, that Evans said the city is going to fight it in court. This is, again, the local official fighting against the DOJ lawsuit. And it says the DOJ argues Rochester's sanctuary and immigration policies are illegal, claiming, quote, those laws and policies are designed to, and in fact do, interfere with and discriminate against the federal government's enforcement of federal immigration law in violation of the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. Now, local official Evans said, I want to be clear that we believe in the rule of law, and we hope the federal government also believes in the rule of law, and added, the rule of law cannot be something that you think is okay when it only suits your purpose, and we will defend and protect our residents in their interest. Of course, residents meaning, of course, probably illegal aliens. Now, on the side of the federal funding freeze, well, look, as many of the current policies are doing right now, that action is now being blocked by a judge. Judges, of course, blocking most of Trump's actions. The Guardian reported this. The Trump administration cannot deny federal funds to cities and counties that have passed laws preventing or limiting cooperation with U.S. immigration officials, a federal judge ruled on Thursday, saying you got to give these little areas all the federal money. You can't withhold it because they're not enforcing federal law. Now, it says that the U.S. District Court Judge William Orrick issued a temporary injunction sought by San Francisco, Santa Clara County, and also it says more than a dozen other municipalities with sanctuary policies, and declared that portions of Donald Trump's executive order were unconstitutional. And they're blocking, of course, Trump's actions. They say this, quote, the cities and counties have also demonstrated a likelihood of irreparable harm. This is Orrick writing in the order. And added the threat to withhold funding causes them irreparable injury in the form of budgetary uncertainty, deprivation of constitutional rights, it says, and undermining trust between the cities and counties and the communities they serve. Now, I note that on his first day in office, the U.S. President, Trump, issued an order directing the Attorney General and Homeland Security Secretary to withhold federal funds from sanctuary jurisdictions as part of his administration's crackdown on immigration. And in another order, it says he directed the federal government to ensure funds to state and local governments don't, quote, abet so-called sanctuary policies that seek to shield illegal aliens from deportation. It adds that meanwhile, on Thursday, the U.S. Transportation Department threatened states with the loss of federal funding if they do not comply with U.S. immigration enforcement efforts. And it says under the judge's order, the federal government is prohibited from directly or indirectly taking any action to withhold, freeze, or condition federal funds. Some are even interpreting this as like, Social Security for illegal aliens and so on. It adds this. The Trump administration must provide written notice of his order to all federal departments and agencies by Monday. So a judge orders the President of the United States. Now, look, we're of course going to have to see if that holds up. And the other key issue right now is whether individual officials who try to block federal agents, could they face arrest, which, we're actually now starting to see happen. On the narrative front, though, and on the legal side, a big part of the argument is also on crime. And this is really how sanctuary city laws work. This is how they work. It appears the Trump administration is using crime as kind of their main talking point with this in order to justify the deportations and to fight back against these laws. And also as a way to criticize the states for not cooperating. The allegation from the Trump side, the Trump administration, is basically that these states and counties are protecting criminals, harming the local people, while sacrificing, again, the safety of everybody, effectively. During an interview with ABC News, board czar Tom Homan, he actually raised this point. Watch this.
The executive order in sanctuary cities is needed. I know a judge has just recently said, another district court judge who does a nationwide injunction, which I don't think they have authority to do. There's a reason they're called district court judges. But we're not going to stop doing what we're doing. The judges can issue these nationwide injunctions, but we're going to keep moving forward. The president's going to sign the executive order because sanctuary cities are sanctuaries for criminals. I'll give you one example. Laken Riley. She fought for her life for 17 minutes. If we didn't have a sanctuary city law in New York, ICE would have got him when he was arrested in New York. He never would have made it to Georgia. Laken Riley would be studying today in the college, and her mother wouldn't have had to bury a daughter. That is one example out of thousands. So we're going to keep putting the pressure on sanctuary cities. We're not giving up.
All right, Trump administration.
Now, there actually is a good amount of truth to that, mainly because of how sanctuary city laws work. The policies mostly protect criminal aliens. That is actually what they do. Basically, the way sanctuary city laws, when they were put into place, how they work, is that if an illegal immigrant commits a crime, local law enforcement and the courts, they used to cooperate with ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, to facilitate the person's deportation. Part of that is just based on the fact that local officials tend to not have international databases when it comes to who this person is, how do you deport them, and so on. They don't actually have the people's identities. ICE would have that power, Border Patrol would have that. And so if an individual who is not a U.S. citizen, has no identity or anything, goes to a court, gives them whatever name he or she wants, and then, is supposed to show up voluntarily, effectively, when they get their next hearing, there's a handoff that normally takes place. They call in ICE. ICE goes there. They arrest the person. And then, of course, the case is handled by them, as well as maybe by the courts to an extent, depending on the crime. But oftentimes they deport them. Sanctuary city laws put into place, they mostly just prevent that from happening. What they do is they forbid local law enforcement from cooperating with federal authorities on that, including on deportations. And so this does mostly act to protect illegal immigrants who commit crimes, specifically. This is not about going after just any random illegal alien for the most part. This is about the criminals. And it seems this is becoming kind of the new focal point in the debate from the White House. In fact, the White House, they put up some new lawn decorations. They put up photographs of alleged illegal immigrants and the crimes that they're facing. I mean, these include horrible things, child rape, murder, other things like that. And this is the official White House post on this. You can see its photos stuck onto the lawn with the words arrested, their photos, the words illegal alien, and also the crime written on these poster boards. And part of the justification for this is that if journalists do stand-ups with the White House in the background, they're going to have to show those posters on camera. And look, this is also being done at the same time the Trump administration is rolling out all these other plans to go after sanctuary city laws that help prevent deportations. A key narrative they have is that the laws are protecting criminals at the cost of American safety. They're effectively saying you're exposing your communities to murder, rape, all kinds of other things. These are the individuals. This is who is being protected. Now, on the other side, here's how it's being framed by other media. This is MSNBC.
The White House has put up about 100 posters of what they say are unauthorized immigrants who have been arrested for violent crimes. You can see them there. They put them up on the driveway of the White House. If you look here, that's the West Wing just at the forefront, the executive mansion itself to the left. But what's particularly noteworthy about this location is it is right directly behind the positions where TV correspondents do their hits from the White House lawn. So therefore, no matter what network you're on, that includes MSNBC, if you're doing a hit from the White House right now, those pictures will be behind you. The White House doing a briefing in about a half hour about what they're doing here. Maria, your response to this image?
So I have to say, one of the biggest challenges that we have with the deportations that we know of so far, for example, with Kilmer Abrego Garcia, we don't know if they've had due process. We don't know if, in fact, these individuals do have a rap.
As you notice, they blurred the photos. And I saw other media doing this too. I saw CNN, for example, did that as well. It seems the argument they have on doing that is they maybe don't believe the Trump administration's framing of the individuals is strong enough to support the criminal claims, or they just don't want to let the White House effectively put, imagery on their shots, which they believe promotes an issue they don't seem to agree with. But on to another topic. Donald Trump is either historically unpopular or historically popular. And that's going to basically depend on which media you're reading. I'll be talking more about the polling numbers and some of the allegations about them after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. President Donald Trump is either historically unpopular or historically popular, and a lot of that just depends on which media you're reading. The dueling narratives on this front, they're about as opposite as you can get. And ABC News, one example of this, ABC declared Trump has lowest 100-day approval rating in 80 years poll. And it writes that 39% of respondents in this ABC News/Washington Post/Ipsos poll said they approve of how Trump is handling his job as president, down 6 percentage points from February, while 55% say they disapprove. It says the previous low in approval for a president at or near 100 days in office in polls, and it says dating to 1945, was Trump's 42% in 2017. Now look, CNN also reported with their own poll, and they say CNN poll, Trump's approval at 100 days lower than any president in at least 7 decades. And look, briefly as a reminder on that, CNN also found in a recent poll that favorability for Democrats is also at record lows. So I don't know, from that perspective, maybe Americans are just, at least according to them, statistically not happy with kind of either side right now. But if you go by recent polls from Reuters and Ipsos, New York Times and Siena, CBS and YouGov, or Pew Research, basically they're all showing relatively the same numbers. They showed Trump with anywhere from around 53% to 59% disapproval ratings. But the discrepancy with Trump's polling is becoming a point of debate in and of itself. And that's because other polls are showing, well, the opposite, actually. Another recent poll from British media showed a very, very different picture. A poll last month from Daily Mail and JL Partners, it showed the numbers were basically flipped. They had Trump at 54% approval rating, only 46% disapproval rating, kind of down partisan lines, really. And it declared, quote, Donald Trump is more popular than ever, according to Shock Poll. So which is it? The least popular president in history or more popular than ever? Which do you believe? So what's going on with this? Well, that also depends on who you ask. The narrative for most of the legacy media, they're saying basically with these numbers, they're saying that Americans are worried about the economy. And they're saying a lot of the recent drop is around fears of a recession. They're saying it's, the tariffs, effectively. And it's possible that the up and down we're seeing in the stock markets from the tariffs are causing some of that, although it should also be noted that the market has actually gone back up again, although, look, it's been all over the place, frankly, lately. But others are also arguing the polls may not be accurate, and some are noting the broader problem with just polling overall. During most of the U.S. elections, going back at least a decade, remember what the polling was like when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. Who was the projected winner and about by how much? They were expecting Hillary Clinton was going to win by a landslide. Polling was showing it. Same thing in, well, most of the other elections. Polling has really been shockingly inaccurate. It's been incredibly inaccurate. And among the few polling organizations that actually did get things right for the most part has been Rasmussen Reports. And they're alleging the problems at the polls are not just errors, they're actually alleging it's propaganda. In a recent post, the organization noted how this appeared during the 2024 elections between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Here's what they said. They said 2024 polling revisited, manufactured political propaganda. They say Rasmussen Report's managing editor, quote, "While I do remember what it was like when we were reporting the presidential horse race numbers weekly, the new data would come in, open it up, and every week, Trump +2. The challenge is trying to find something in the crosstabs that might be newsworthy because of the top line remains static." They said that there was no news in it. Meanwhile, you had so many other pollsters showing Harris +4 or +5 or even +6. And the individual said, "I was becoming worried. How come we were not seeing the kind of movement these other polls were reporting?" In other words, when Rasmussen was looking at the numbers, they were seeing +4 Trump, and that was basically what they were seeing. But when they were looking at data from other polling organizations, it was showing the polar opposite. It was +5, +6, +7 Harris. And they were saying, well, what's wrong with our data? Why are we getting different results than these other organizations? And they said this, only in hindsight was it apparent that the whole joy/momentum thing for Harris in the August-September polls was a fabrication, a statistical mirage manufactured as political propaganda. This is according to David Plouffe's subsequent confession. It says that the Harris campaign's own internal polls never showed them ahead. That actually did come out publicly, by the way. And they say is the nail in the coffin of the mainstream polling racket's credibility. That's Robert Stacey McCain. Effectively, what they're saying is that when you have a political narrative come out, most popular candidate, they're trying to drum up their support, really. News organizations, they're alleging, basically cooperate with certain polling organizations and help fabricate that lie. That is the allegation here. And with the recent polling, Rasmussen also broke down what they're seeing in the polls right now. They note that while Trump's approval rating does seem to have dropped recently, the whole narrative about this being a historic low is actually a lie. They say it's not accurate. The polling is not necessarily great for Trump right now, but the numbers are not technically unusual historically for a president around this time during a second term. Remember, the whole narrative is, lowest approval rating at the 100-day mark. Mark Mitchell of Rasmussen Report said this, quote, "The MSM, mainstream media, will use any trick in the book to sandbag Trump approval, but the votes don't lie," and includes all the data there. Now, Mark Mitchell also elaborated on this even more in an interview on Benny Johnson's The Benny Show. Watch this.
What's really wild to me, if you have it available, is the Google search trends of Trump approval.
Yeah, we got it. You already got it, Quan. You already got it loaded.
This is one of the most stunning things that tells me a psyop is happening, because when those this is organic search volume of Trump approval. And it's like, oh, wow, it's spiking. If you look at the numbers, it's second or third highest month in all of Google's search history, going all the way back to 2004. But look at Obama. Look at Biden. Look at Bush. Nobody cared about their approval. There's something very specific about Trump, and there's something very specific about right now where it's like, well, we know cynically they don't have really much political power. And so all they have is their mouthpieces just drone away trying to undermine the anti-establishment candidate.
So what is this, right? Is it a psyop? Is it them in denial? You tell me, right? Which side is right? But based on the information, it does seem that some of it, at least, is being misrepresented. In terms, at the very least, of how Trump's polling compares to other presidents. And also the tariffs, they definitely did have an impact. Although if those get worked out and new trade deals get made, which they say people are lining up to do, over 70 countries at least, well, maybe things will bounce back. And so we'll see how long this downward polling trend works or whether the media is going to maintain it. But on this point, though, polls actually do matter. They might not matter so much in terms of giving you a real picture, but they can influence public opinion. And when it comes to the debates right now taking place, this is one of the big arguments. Why would they want to falsify polls? Why would they want to do that? It's because when people believe that everybody, the whole crowd, is for one thing and against something else, you feel like you're marginalized if you're, kind of the one liking something nobody else does. They can manufacture support. They can prop up a new candidate. They can prop up a product. They can make it seem that everyone is behind this new issue, even if people are not behind it. And they can then push things into the public sphere that people might not actually really go with otherwise. They can manufacture the illusion of support. And more importantly, they can also influence voter turnout. This is one of the big arguments when it comes to elections, by the way. One of the big arguments was it can disenfranchise voters. If people see that, hey, in New York, there's no way that my candidate is ever going to win, so I might as well not even vote. The polling works to disenfranchise the voter. If media and pollsters can manufacture a narrative, that narrative can also start to have a real impact on public perception. And it's in this context, Donald Trump is now demanding investigations into the polling organizations. This is what he said on Truth Social. He said, great pollster John McLaughlin, one of the most highly respected in the industry, has just stated that the failing New York Times poll and the ABC Washington Post poll about a person named Donald J. Trump, me, are fake polls from fake news organizations. He says the New York Times has only 37% Trump 2024 voters, and the ABC Washington Post poll has only 34% Trump voters, unheard of numbers unless looking for a negative result. In other words, they're not polling on an accurate picture of the president. If they're polling only 37% of people who voted for Trump in 2024, then maybe they're not going to get higher than 37% of actual support for Trump. That's the narrative here, right? If Washington Post only has 34% Trump voters, and that's the basis of their poll, and they're showing 39% support, that means that not only has Trump retained all of his supporters, it means that he has actually gained new ones. But the polling, because they did not make it properly balanced, is not demonstrating that. That is the narrative coming from Trump right now. He says that these are unheard of numbers unless you're looking for a negative result. He says which they are, he alleges, right? And he adds, quote, these people should be investigated for election fraud, and we'll see if that happens. But he said in the Fox News poll, while you're at it, he said they are negative criminals who apologize to their subscribers and readers after I win big, much bigger than their polls showed I would win, lose a lot of credibility, and then go on cheating and lying for the next cycle, only worse. In other words, what he's accusing them of is effectively using misleading polls for political purpose. And he's alleging it's even a form of election fraud. Again, as I mentioned, part of the argument with polling is that it can disenfranchise voters. It can manufacture support if you believe that, AOC and Bernie Sanders right now, for example, they have, big events. They're getting allegedly thousands of people. Is that real? Is it not? Some people have questioned it. But the point is you can actually manufacture things like that, manufacture support, and push individuals to the front of a political party by, again, creating the illusion of support. I'm not saying that they're faking that, but I'm using that as an example, of course. And also, again, if you want to manufacture a poll and you only poll, let's say, 20, 30% of the people who like the thing you oppose, and 70, 80% of the people you poll are people who agree with you, what is going to happen with your poll? Well, obviously, it's going to reflect the 70-30. Obviously, it's going to reflect the narrative you premeditated, right? And of course, that is then used politically as propaganda. And it's interesting now that all the media seems to be kind of working in lockstep doing this. Is that intentional? Did they all use the same method that Trump is alleging that they used? Well, that's a real question here. And of course, if they do investigate this, I don't know what the laws would be in terms of election fraud, but remember, Trump is actually suing some of these news outlets. He's suing them, for example, for misrepresenting information as ways of effectively changing, again, votes, right? For example, 60 Minutes altering their interview with Kamala Harris in such a way that would make her sound better on camera than she actually did sound. even splicing audio and putting things together to make her sound more coherent. While with Trump, he's alleging they've done the opposite. This is important because, again, that actually does violate some laws with some of these organizations. If you have a TV newscast and you're on television, there are certain laws in place that would prevent you from kind of messing with information like that. You have to give equal representation during elections specifically, and if you fail to do that, you can lose your broadcasting license. And so it's not clear whether Trump is actually going to take action on this. It's not clear whether he's going to do anything with it, but he is at the very least alleging that something has been done wrong, and he is saying that he wants to have it investigated. So we will see if anything happens. That said, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. And first off here, 408 Mackenzie household, you're saying, a point that I want to bring up pertaining to deportation due process, etc., pertains to the fact that the 300 million people of the United States never received due process upon the entry of the illegal aliens. Why do the illegal aliens get due process? Well, and that's the argument actually from the Trump side right now. When you have these officials calling for quote-unquote due process, there's two sides to it. On one side, Tom Homan noted that when people are taken in by ICE, ICE actually does conduct a process, and he's alleging that actually they are getting due process, but it's being carried out by ICE. He said that if you let the normal court system handle it, it will never happen. You're dealing with, they're saying at least 20 million people, at least 20 million, just based on the numbers they have on the surface. They're saying it's probably even a lot more than that because, you don't really know everybody because they're unaccounted for, but that's a lot of people. And he's saying effectively that if you have to go through a process for 20 million people, and they're alleging they want to deport all of them, you will never see the end of it. You will never deport that many people. It will never happen. And the other concern with that is if people see that, hey, even if you want to deport me, you're not going to be able to do it, that will have the effect of encouraging even more people to illegally enter the United States because they then believe that it's a crime without punishment. And that's the other side with it too. It's become so normalized in this country that it is a crime, but it's not viewed as a crime. It's not viewed as a wrongdoing. And so people feel morally justified in doing this to the extent where they believe that they have legal rights and they believe that the country seems to owe them something. That's part of the argument with it. The other side with it too, when the Trump administration talks about due process, they note, as did 408 Mackenzie, they note that a lot of these people coming in, well, most of them, there was no due process on their acts to come illegally into the United States. There was no court process, there was no visa process, there was none of that. What is the due process for entering the United States? You apply for a visa, you go through a normal port of entry, you get a green card, maybe you buy a gold card now. There is a normal process, and individuals who really just skip the line by illegally entering the country, they avoided that. They violated the law, right? And so how do you deal with them? The other side is a lot of the individuals were actually bused, shipped, and flown to different parts of the U.S. That has to do with the way the CBP One app was set up and the way the Biden administration was effectively coordinating this. You had a lot of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that were trafficking people into the United States, getting even taxpayer money to do it, and also getting United Nations money to do it. In fact, the numbers on this, it's even public information, including how much money they were paying to these organizations. An entire system set up to facilitate the mass movement of individuals into the United States. Now, what was the due process on that? Well, the technical due process, which is going to be funny when it comes to tariffs, by the way, is that this was done as an effective international treaty. But because Congress would need to actually vote on international treaties, you need a 2/3 vote from Congress for a treaty. They began renaming treaties as other things. They call it an accord, like the Paris Climate Accord. They call it an international agreement or a global compact, like the Global Compact for Migration. They name it things other than a treaty, even though it is a treaty, in order to bypass the law. Again, the due process for that would be if you wanted to join an international program, you need a 2/3 vote from Congress, and that's the law. That was also not followed. And the irony with that, too, is they're saying that international agreements, including tariffs, part of the Supreme Court argument right now that they're hearing is that tariffs are treaties. They've never been regarded as such as far as I know, but that is part of the narrative, which is what they want to have done because they want Congress to be able to have a say in any kind of global tariff. And so that's where things are at with that whole narrative. The irony is, if they do say that Congress needs to vote on every single international agreement to the extent that even tariffs are included on that, which was historically never really the case. It was one of the few powers the president really has, the ability to issue tariffs. So it's one of the sole powers that used to be delegated to the president, among the few. It would actually mean that if they made Congress able to vote on all of this, then all of those other international agreements, including every agreement with the United Nations, including any climate agreement, including any agreement with the World Health Organization, including anything of that sort, like the Global Compact for Migration, the compact that was one of the programs facilitating this, if they were to make that decision, it would mean that Congress would in the future have to vote on all of this. And so I don't know if it's in their interest to do it. But on that point too, that would be due process. Due process was violated on the international scale. Due process was violated on the individual level. Due process was debatably violated even in the mass movement of people and the facilitation of it and the use of taxpayer dollars to do it. In fact, they did not even tell Americans that your money was being used for this. It was done with a lot of cloak and dagger. And the issue now is, well, do they get due process to be sent back? Or is this a crisis that is not able to be solved? If you do not have the ability to deport these people, and if you have to go through due process, it will never happen. Meaning, effectively, America just doesn't have borders, if that is the case. It would mean that effectively this is legal, basically. Not to mention the fact, too, that even a lot of the judges, if you have to go through a process, the inherent bias of some judges, and there have been cases of that, they'll just allow people to stay. And in some of these cases where judges were trying to conceal people or prevent ICE from grabbing them, that was also part of what some of them were accused of. They were accused of, effectively, when cases did come through their courts, they were giving lighter sentences to people so that they would not be deported. For example, lowering a felony to a misdemeanor so the individual would not be deported. A lot of that has been happening in California and elsewhere. If it becomes a federal crime, federal law enforcement can go in and deport the person. Oftentimes, if it's a misdemeanor, they cannot. And so a lot of judges have been accused, at least, of reducing sentences of illegal immigrants in order to prevent them from being deported. And so, that's what due process looks like. Is that right? Is that legal? Remember that part of Trump's brand new executive order is also going to look into this kind of thing. Are illegal immigrants getting effectively additional rights and different treatment from American citizens that does work to favor them or even protect them? That's going to be one of the things to look into. Let's see, another question here. MDIAN MEC, MC. You're saying Tom Homan is right. There is a reason district court judges are for local districts. Yeah, and that's tying into even jurisdiction, right? If you have a district judge, can the judge make rulings outside of their district? Can a judge freeze a presidential order that applies to the entire country and not just their local area? I mean, that's a big question, right? Would you need to effectively freeze it in every single state? Again, we don't really have answers to this. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing some of this. There's also the issue of even whether a judge can free or make demands of a foreign country, which, for example, the order trying to bring back the accused MS-13 gang member from El Salvador, the basis of that is that even if they say the Trump administration has to bring the person back, the guy who was deported is a citizen of El Salvador. Can you order another country to deport one of their own citizens to not face, justice, but instead be returned to a country where they were violating the law as an illegal immigrant? Can you do that? Like, return? You would effectively be committing the act of smuggling if you were to do that, right? And so when it comes to Bukele saying, I can't do that, not only is he saying the U.S. district courts and so on don't have jurisdiction in El Salvador, he's also saying if the guy is, again, labeled now as a terrorist, if he were to bring a terrorist into the United States, and if you're an MS-13 gang member, you are now considered a terrorist, that would be violating U.S. law, and he himself would be committing a crime. And so he said he can't do it, right? JNS2 1970, you're saying, look to Sweden and the effect of mass migration. How soon will the UK follow Sweden? I've been following some of the stuff in Sweden. You're having now some really crazy things in Sweden. I was actually looking into some of the claims there. There is a huge uptick of hand grenade attacks in Sweden. I mean, last I checked, a lot of these countries, you can't even buy a gun. Where are people getting hand grenades? There's a huge uptick of child assassins in Sweden. And if you read the articles, they don't really say it's like a migrant issue, but they do name certain gangs. And I researched some of these gangs. It's migrant gangs doing this in Sweden. You have rival migrant gangs having, turf wars in Sweden. They're using hand grenades against each other. They're recruiting children to murder people. And it's migrant gangs doing it. Not to mention it's a terrible thing also, but huge uptick in rapes and other crimes. And some of these countries, they seem to be interested in just not covering it. They don't want people to talk about it, even though the local citizens are being, I'd say abused by many of these people. They don't want people talking about it. And it raises the question of, well, how do you justify that, right? Is it just to allow women to face, rape gangs when, and you can't even talk about it versus, the right of an illegal immigrant to not face criticism? How do you weigh those things, right? In my opinion, if you have to conceal reality to make something look good, what you're trying to make good probably does not look good. If you have to, conceal evidence in order to create a certain perception because the evidence would do the opposite, then are you admitting that what you're doing is harmful to the country? Are you admitting that this is a problem for the country? If you're not letting people have debates and discussions about a certain issue, then to an extent I'd say you're admitting that it's a harmful issue. I think that in itself is almost an admission that a problem has been created. And so, yeah, some of these countries, they're really dealing with a real problem. And the other issue too is that, they're bringing in very large numbers of people. They're mostly the ones having kids. The local populations, they have really downward trends in having children. They're going to be replaced by these people, probably within a couple generations. Even probably within maybe one or two generations more, the actual original citizens will probably become minorities in their own countries. And the problem we have too is that when you're dealing with some of these groups, they can be pretty radical. They want to implement the same types of laws you have in the Middle East. They're trying to change the governments of those countries, in other words. They're changing the religion, they're changing the government, they're trying to change the laws. And if you change the religion, government, and laws, is it still the same country? Or has it been conquered by other means? I'd say for a lot of European countries, they're facing this real question. What is their future? And if you understand also, in other countries where that has happened, you often see genocides take place. As soon as those organizations or groups take power, you often do see them carry out genocides. And so, is that good? I don't think so. But it is, I think, concerning, right? You know, in America, of course, we have a ton of illegal immigrants as well. But for the most part, like, it's people from Latin America. And in my opinion, countries are more defined, right? Differences in countries. It's more defined by differences in religion. And so if you're just mixing, you know, Catholics, because a lot of Latin America is Catholic, with Protestants, you're not going to like significantly change the country. You know, you will change the culture quite a bit, and I'd say American culture is kind of all over the place anyways. But you're not going to change it to the extent where they change the entire system of government. The only problem that's being imported that is just an epidemic in Latin America is gangs and crime. The gang problem in Latin America is one of the elements that is causing most of their problems. And the mass illegal immigration into the U.S., it is creating the exact problem here in the United States, the problem of gangs and crime and corruption that goes along with it. And so I think the risk we face if, for example, illegal immigrants are protected and prevented from being deported is probably what you're already seeing in like New York, for example, where you had Tren de Aragua gang members staying at the Roosevelt Hotel on American tax dollars and then going out and robbing people in Times Square in broad daylight and facing almost no criminal repercussions for that. Even recruiting children, people who are underage, because it's a different system of law for kids who are underage. Effectively, in other words, they have laws that went to the brink of legalizing certain crimes, and then the gangs manipulate those loopholes in order to grow and proliferate and become wealthy and victimize, the local population. They're doing the same thing here that they did in their own countries. And the irony of that, a lot of the people leaving those countries, they're leaving because of those problems. And I'm saying this because I talked to a lot of them. Remember when I was in Panama, I actually got into a lot of the migrant camps, in particular in Darien, right at the mouth of the Darien Gap. I got access to several migrant camps, and almost every person I talked to said they were leaving their countries because of the gangs. They said that the gangs were so bad that they could not live there anymore. And the issue now is the gangs that made those countries unlivable are now here. And so how long can that go on without crime or punishment before we have the same problem they have? I'd say we're already pretty far down that road, actually. And of course, that is the narrative right now from the Trump administration. They're actually trying to go after these people. They're really just focused, allegedly, on the gang members right now. Another question here. Martin McKenzie, you're saying, with socialist governments, crime is a tool of the state. That is totally accurate. You're saying if they do it, it's not a crime. If you do it, it is. Actually, this ties into something really deep. So if you understand what communism and socialism is merely the implementation of communism into a system of government. And this is misunderstood a lot of times. A lot of people say, oh, that's not communism, that's socialism. What is socialism? Communism technically is not a system of government. Communism can exist in many things. It can exist in a social organization, it can exist in a union, it can be a technocracy, for example. It can be syndicalism through unions, syndicalists. It can exist through gangs. And technically, true communism is only achieved through the negation of all systems, through the destruction of everything, when the entire system is destroyed. And so anything short of that would not be communism. You could say communism is like the belief. Communism is like the religion that animates the system. Whether it's animating the union, whether it's animating a gang, whether it's animating a narco-terrorist organization, the communist system is merely the belief. It's like a religion more. And so when it comes to government, when communism becomes the belief of a government, it becomes a socialist government. Socialism is the implementation of communism within the systems of government. That's all it is. And a lot of people say, well, it's not real communism. The reason they say that is communism would only be achieved through the negation of the state. So communism would technically have to destroy the state in order for communism to be achieved, which may give you some answers on why communist systems don't work. They actually do work, but they're designed to destroy the system. They're actually designed to do that. It does not work by design. It is meant to destroy. And so when they put it into practice, that's what happens, right? And so you're saying that socialist governments, crime is a tool of the state. So what have always been the tools of communists? If you go back to Vladimir Lenin, they called it the lumpen proletariat, meaning the gangs, meaning the criminals. If you go back to the Bolsheviks, what were they? The Bolsheviks were a criminal terrorist organization. They were actually terrorists. Go back to the bombing of Wall Street and all that stuff. Who were the communists? It was anarchist terrorists. There were people who were carrying out bombings and assassinations and everything else all around the United States. If you go to China, the Chinese Communist Party, who were the communists? According to Mao Zedong, it was the quote-unquote scum of society. He actually called them that, the scum of society. It was the murderers, it was the criminals, it was the gang members, it was the drug dealers, it was the scum of society. Those were the tools of the communist state. Communism always does this. And so again, the technical term of, when they talk about the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, which is effectively like the poor against the rich when they try to make class struggle, technically they're not talking about actual poor people. Technically what they're talking about is the quote-unquote lumpen proletariat, meaning the criminal underclass. Communism is meant to empower the criminal underclass and effectively assist them in the plunder and robbery of anybody with money or wealth in the entire country. Communism works as a type of mafia, basically. Even the Chinese Communist Party today, a lot of people call it a gangster regime. A gangster regime because it functions like a mafia. That's what communism is, I'd say. And so on your point, when you're talking about socialist governments, that crime is a tool of the state. If they do it, it's not a crime. If you do it, it is. That also ties into the nature of why they want to destroy religion. Because what defines good or evil, right? What defines right or wrong? Well, for most of us, right and wrong, good and evil is defined by two things. One, your religious values, which directly has something to do with your moral values. You believe some things are moral, you believe some things are not moral. And it also ties into law, right? But law typically is founded in the morality of the populace, which is also why if you introduce a new religion into a country, it'll probably change the laws, which is why a country can be changed if you flood it with a new religion, right? You change it, right? And so what happens then if you destroy religion? Or if a criminal organization comes in and tries to act as the government, what then happens? Well, religion becomes a challenge to the new government. If the new government tries to implement laws that are not in line with the moral values of the populace will oppose it. You can't create immoral laws, right? Otherwise, people will revolt. They'll fight against it. So it's partly because of that religion is a direct threat to communism. And so what does the communist group, what do they want? They talk about political correctness. And I know this term is used differently these days. I know these days it has different meanings. But if you go back to the actual original use of the term political correctness, that goes to China. That was about 1967 under Mao Zedong, political correctness. And what did it actually mean? It meant that if you are in line with the actions of the state, you are politically correct. So they were carrying at the time the Cultural Revolution. If you believed in religion, You could be considered superstitious and they could kill you. If you had flowers in front of your yard, you were considered a rightist and they could kill you. If you were a woman and you painted your fingernails, they could call you a rightist and they could kill you. They glorified, the dirt under the fingernails because they said it was like a sign of the worker and stuff like that. So they wanted filth. They wanted ugliness, right? If you believed in any kind of traditional value, they would say that you were believing in old superstitions and things like that, and they could kill you. And that was politically correct. That was not correct from a moral standpoint. It was not correct from a religious standpoint, but it was correct from a political standpoint because the system that was put into place was from the Communist Party, and that's what they were doing. And so if you wanted to be politically correct, you had to go along with evil things. You had to participate in killings. You had to kill your landlord. If you were a child, you had to beat up and shame or maybe murder your teacher. They did that during the Cultural Revolution. That was politically correct. And the demonstration that you were going along with the evil things of the state and going against your own morality and going against your own religion, that was a demonstration of political correctness. And so, in other words, if a government destroys religion, what then becomes the basis of good and evil? If a government comes in and makes itself effectively God, which is what communism tries to do, right? What becomes good and what becomes evil? What defines it? What defines it is state action. If the party says it's good, then it's good. If the party says it's evil, then it's evil, and you are not allowed to say otherwise. The party effectively becomes the basis of morality. The party action defines what is right, in other words. And that's what communists do. And as Martin McKenzie notes, they effectively work as criminal organizations a lot of times. Genocides, robbery, redistribution, but also a lot of corrupt officials just taking money for themselves and so on. You'll notice that communism, even though it claims to get rid of classes, it manufactures extreme differences in wealth. The class state, the class system, becomes only the Communist Party members and everybody else. The Communist Party members are typically the wealthy ones. Everybody else is equally miserable and equally poor. That's what a communist system looks like, which is one of the big ironies of communism, is that it talks about getting rid of slavery, but it effectively enslaves an entire country. It talks about getting rid of classes, but it creates one of the most disparate, it creates one of the most polarized class societies you can possibly imagine. And I'd say also this is by design. In fact, when Karl Marx himself was asked about these things, he said, you're basically just talking about enslaving people. He said, well, people are already slaves. They're slaves to ideas. They're slaves to culture. They're slaves to systems. And he's saying that effectively he was going to create a new system of slavery under the narrative of trying to sell people on it by saying he's going to get rid of it, right? Doing the very thing that he claims he wants to get rid of. Anyways. TZ Burton, you're saying illegal immigrants are now unauthorized citizens, now media, changing the language to bend the narrative. Yeah, right? Well, remember, the technical language used to be illegal alien, right? Illegal alien is the technical legal phrase. They changed that. It's now considered an insult or not politically correct, right? It's considered not politically correct to say illegal alien because, again, an alien means an unknown individual, an unknown person, which is what they are. They are unknown persons whose presence in the country is a crime, meaning they are illegal. Some people stopped using illegal aliens. They just call them illegals. That became also a politically divisive term, deemed politically incorrect. The narrative from the left is basically, how can a person be illegal? A person is not a crime. technically, again, if you understand the term, the legal term, illegal alien, then yes, it is designating the alien as an illegal. That is the very basis of the crime. That this is an unknown individual who is illegal, meaning that if you are illegally entering a country, your physical presence is the act of crime, is the act of committing a crime, meaning yes, you are illegal because your presence is the crime when you're violating that law. And so, people stopped using those terms. Now they say, I think we say illegal immigrant. And part of the reason I do use illegal immigrant is this. The problem is you're not just talking about aliens. You're talking about, some of them are in fact migrants because you had facilitated illegal immigration. It was not legal because it did not go through due process. We want to talk about due process. So it was illegal. They've now lost their status. Donald Trump did remove their temporary protection status, which did establish the legal element of their migration. That has now been repealed, so now they are illegal immigrants. Most of them are, I shouldn't say most of them, a lot of them are known because actually through that process, CBP1 and so on, they actually do get their biometrics, they do get their identities and so on. They do have a process for that. And so with that point, they're not aliens. They are technically immigrants. And you can say they're illegal because, again, they've been given orders to deport, and if they're still here, they're not doing it. And so that's the way it has gone. And now, as T.Z. Burton notes, they're changing the narrative yet again as unauthorized citizens. And if you ask me, that's a dangerous one. That's a dangerous one. Why is that? Because not only you went from calling them aliens to calling them migrants to calling them citizens. What does it mean to be a citizen? How is a migrant different from a citizen? Well, a citizen has legal status. A citizen pays taxes. A citizen gets government representation. A citizen can vote. A citizen has all the rights of every other citizen. And so if you're calling them unauthorized citizens, you're saying that you're acknowledging that they're unauthorized. You've removed the idea that they're committing a crime. You've now made it so that it is not a crime, and you're acknowledging that they should have rights as citizens, which would include voting rights, by the way. And so, language actually does matter. Language really does matter, because within the language is the connotation of the legalities and the everything else that goes with it, as I just described. And so, if you change the language, you can actually change the perception of law. You can change the perception of law by changing language. And why is that? What is the basis of law? It is written law. If you change the meaning of language, of certain words, you can change the application of law. You understand? For example, if the law says it's illegal to steal but not to borrow, and so media and political pundits reframe certain types of crime not as stealing but instead as borrowing, they can use that as the basis of creating an exception to a law, making a certain type of criminal activity legal, just by changing the language. And this is done in a lot of things. Even, for example, when it came to like gender and stuff, written law within the Constitution about giving women rights was used on the gender argument to give rights to all 72 genders or whatever it was. And that was also used to make it so that it gave them additional legal protections. Part of the legal basis for the whole transgender movement was through a constitutional amendment, and it was a reinterpretation of language, the original language, which was meant to protect women in particular, but was expanded through the manipulation of language to include all quote-unquote gender identity, basically other than men. And just case in point, that if you alter reality by controlling what is shown to people, and then alter language while you do that, you can actually alter the laws of a country, especially if you get judges or prosecutors who are within that mind frame where they want to work with you on it, which is also why you're going to get radically different interpretations of law depending on the political orientation of the judge or of a prosecutor, which is also part of the argument of why people judge shop, which is one of the arguments of the Trump administration right now, that some of these law firms, they specifically go to judges who are more likely to rule in their favor. And I don't think it's necessarily a right-left thing. I think conservatives might do it too. If you get prosecuted for a crime in a liberal district versus a conservative district, depending on what your crime is, it will probably be handled a lot differently. And if it's more of a partisan issue, you're going to get a better or worse probably decision depending on the politics or depending on the area. Which is also why when Trump was facing charges in New York City or Washington, D.C., he basically said there was no chance he could ever win a case because, these are liberal districts. If you look at the voting map, overwhelmingly they don't like him. And so, how do you get a fair trial? Again, it's because of the political orientations and the perceptions of law between these two very different worldviews now. All right, folks, that said, thank you so much for being here. Join me tomorrow again, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If you want to help us out, don't forget to give us a like. It helps us. Also, leave a comment. That helps us as well. So don't forget, leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the show. You think it's good? You think I should change something? Let me know in the comments. It helps us as well. That said, folks, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And that said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.